First book of Samuel, chapters 28 to 31 today, and that will finish off the book of 1 Samuel. It's basically continuing the theme of problems between Saul and David, but there are three really interesting points in this, so we're going to whiz through the story and then come back and look at those points. The story begins with the Philistines once again building up an army, looking very ready to come and attack the Israelites. Saul is quite worried about this and wants to talk to God about it, but God is not talking to him. It notes that Saul has banished all the mediums and spiritists from the kingdom, or whatever it is, but he wants one because God's not answering him, so he wants to consult with the dead. He speaks to people and says, is there one available? They find one apparently who is hiding somewhere called Endor. Saul goes to see this medium and asks for her to contact Samuel. And I kind of thought that this was going to be a bit sort of like nothing was going to happen. But no, she gets hold of Samuel and Samuel basically turns up, it sounds like. So he and Saul can sit down and have a conversation. Very weird. But it turns out Samuel is quite miffed at Saul for, as he puts it, disturbing him. And so, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Right, okay, there's an interesting response. But Saul tells Samuel anyway that he's worried about the Philistines about to attack the Israelites and wants to know what to do about it. But Samuel delivers the rather unwelcome news, a reminder to Saul that God is not happy with him at all for disobeying him earlier on. And drops the additional bombshell that, by the way, you're going to die tomorrow and the whole of Israel is going to be conquered. Not a great meeting for Saul, as it turns out. We then switch back to David, who's still among the Philistines and has been for over a year at this point, I believe. And it sounds like David's about to go to war with the Philistines against the Israelites, so that's a little confusing. But he's talking to King Achish, the Gath king of the Philistines. And Achish, it sounds like, is getting some grief from his other ruler-type people because they're slightly sceptical of David's intentions. Which you kind of think, well, finally, I mean, he switched sides after being the hero who lopped off Goliath's head. And they just seem perfectly cool with him living among them and all the rest of it. But it does seem there is some sort of hesitancy about what David's motives and intentions are. Achish seems perfectly cool with it, but his other people aren't, so he says, fine, okay, David, you're going to have to sit this one out. We then randomly have the Amalekites turn up. We'll come back to that. And among other things, they raid some area, some settlement, and they whip off with David's two wives. David asks God if he should do anything about this. That seems like an interesting question, but God says anyway, yes, go and get them. So he goes and catches up the Amalekites, kills them all, everybody, totally destroys them. Again, we'll come back to that. And gets his wives back and everything seems relaxed and groovy. We then cut back to the Philistines attacking the Israelites. And just as Samuel said, Saul's sons are all killed, including Jonathan, who loves David as himself, or whatever it was. And Saul is mortally wounded. And interestingly, Saul decides he's going to kill himself or finish himself off because he's already going to die, to stop the Philistines from running him through and abusing him because they are terrible, in his words, uncircumcised fellows. It's interesting. He's full of all the insults, isn't he? But anyway, so that's it. Saul dies. The Israelites hear about this and they have a panic and they all leg it. The Philistines then find Saul's body, lop his head off, because obviously, and then get Saul and his sons, and it says fasten them to some sort of wall to be basically put on display. And that is the end of the story. That's not a very nice ending, but to be fair, Saul he had some problems, didn't he? But yeah, so that's the end of that story. And then let's say there were three very interesting points in that fairly short section. One being the medium. So, okay, this seems like the first biblical reference to someone actually existing after they've died. And there's been talk of people being gathered to their people and all that, but there's not been there's no appearance from anybody who's already been dead. So, yeah, I mean, it's not really an afterlife, and it's really annoying that Samuel had nothing to say about what he'd been disturbed from doing. I mean, was he reading a book? Was he having a bath? I mean, he's just no idea. That's extremely annoying. We then also have David, who is seemingly fighting with the Philistines. And I mean, I get that God doesn't like Saul, and he does sometimes use people to punish other people. But I mean, he doesn't like Saul, but surely he must really not like the Philistines. They were worshipping Dagon the Dagu not that long ago, but God seems, I don't know, I guess it doesn't necessarily mean that God likes the Philistines, it just means he's using the Philistines, or getting David to use the Philistines to do what he wants with the Israelites and punish them. But clearly things are not going well for the Israelites. And God did warn them that if they have their king, it's not going to go well. So fair enough, I suppose. And then last but not least, we have David killing totally all of the Amalekites. The Amalekites who Saul killed all of totally back in chapter 15. So that was episode 69, where Saul fell out of favour with God because he was told to kill the Amalekites, and he did kill them all except he spared the king and some cattle and sheep and stuff, which he then sacrificed to God. And then Samuel killed the king instead. So all the Amalekites were dead. And then sometime later, and I get this is a few years, but they were all dead. They don't just suddenly appear again, surely. So the Amalekites had to be killed again. I've talked about this a few times in terms of total language, saying that these people have been wiped out and then they turn up again later. But this is kind of the most extreme case. I mean, what's it, 14 chapters apart. 1 minute they're killed, and then 14 chapters later they're killed again. Don't know what to do with that anyway, but yeah. So that's the end of the first book of Samuel. So the next video will be the summary of that. We have a new subscriber who's been doing some brilliant stuff with the early videos, making comments, adding in some detail that I wasn't aware of. So I'm very welcoming of all extra views, opinions, any other information that people have. Wonderful to hear it, and it helps put some context in a lot of this, because a lot of it doesn't make a great deal of sense, or at least in the context of the Bible on its own. There's clearly some other historical concept. But yeah, I'd love to know what you think. Otherwise, yeah, we'll move on and do the summary of the whole book of 1 Samuel and see if we can find some way to wrap that up neatly.